Welcome to Brazen Education with Educator Barnes, a podcast with a focus on speaking your truth, being transparent to help others, and having no shame about it. Because we can't move forward until the truth is known. Welcome back to another episode of Brazen Education. I'm your host, Educator Barnes, and I'm flying solo today. If you've been following this podcast since the very beginning, you know that I did a lot of the earlier episodes solo, and then I started interviewing people. And I want to get back to having some episodes where I am just sharing some information, and those episodes will obviously be shorter than the ones when I'm interviewing someone else and we're having those interactions. Actually, episode 73 was supposed to cover a different topic, but some things on the back end didn't work out. And there's been a lot of buzz about a topic that I think is super important to talk about. So instead, I decided to rearrange this podcast and focus on something different. So today, I'm going to talk a little bit about teacher and students relationships in the age of social media. And I'm going to get right into the situation that made me decide that this topic was worth talking about, but also talking about in a way where we actually address issues. So if you've been on social media, you know there was a video that went viral of a Black male young teacher who allowed students who all appeared to be Black females, allowed them to unbraid his hair because he had a hair appointment. For those of you that don't know much about Afro textured hair or what happens when you go to a braid or a twist appointment, it is the expectation that you show up there with your hair unbraided, untwisted, and combed out. Occasionally, the person may do it for you, but typically they add on a charge, and you normally arrange that before you just show up with your hair still in the last style that it was in. So for whatever reason, this teacher decided to allow these students to do this, and the teacher posted the video. And this is when, the court of public opinion started to become divided. Some of the people said, I don't see the issue with it, it's harmless. They even went on to post pictures of teachers who were white, who had kids styling or doing something with their hair. And then the other part of social media was like, this is wrong. This is crossing a boundary. And this is inappropriate behavior. There could be something else going on. And then you have what I call your social media sleuths who, I don't know what these people do. And I'm not trying to insult anybody who goes and gathers this information. But there's the people on social media that when an issue comes up, they start combing whatever a person who is in the center of the social media story, they start combing their social media. And with that combing of this particular teacher's social media, there were some things that were found that alluded to the fact that not only did this teacher not have appropriate boundaries between him and his students, he also was doing some other things that would not be appropriate regarding minors. But I want to talk a little bit about the people who are like, well, he had really good relationships with kids. Now, I teach a class called Teaching and Learning in the Middle School. I have been a professor since 2013. I've also been a English middle school teacher, English high school teacher. I've been a middle school school administrator where I co-supervised the middle school. I've been a literacy coach. So I have worked with kids in the K-12 setting. I've worked with kids or students rather, who are adults. And, I work with other organizations, whether that's through church camps. So I have a lot of experience working with children. And one of the things about me is that most people can never guess my age. I always appear younger than I am. So I'm always cognizant of what I am doing and how that would appear. But when I am working with pre-service teachers, and that's what how we refer to teachers who are in an education program, who are going through it to become teachers, these questions come up. And in a lot of my classes, I like to do scenarios where I put scenarios on the board, and typically they're based in real scenarios that I have dealt with or the teacher has dealt with, and I change them up significantly so no one can be identified. And then we talk through what would you do. And part of the reason I do these scenarios is because I would rather students work this out in a safe, brave space, because you got to be brave to say what you would do, and also be brave enough to hear that maybe that's not the path you should take. I would want them to figure that out before they get with children and before they take a misstep, because not every misstep, the intention wasn't meant to be bad or to cause harm, but harm could have been caused. So normally, sometimes I don't think I told this story this semester. So if any of my, or not last semester, so any of my former college students are watching, they're like, "You didn't tell the story." You know, I got different stories I got to tell each semester. When I was younger, it was my dad, my mom, and I had two younger sisters. So my dad just kind of gave into the fact that we're gonna watch Lifetime. We're gonna watch this channel, and my dad had a way of trying. Since we were already gonna watch this, he was like, if I have to watch this channel, I'm gonna find some stuff that's important. So, you know, once I said I wanted to be a teacher, I get accepted to Purdue University. I'm coming home for winter break. My dad would find movies for me to watch. And there was one movie he had me watch on Lifetime. I can't remember the name of it, but essentially there was this teacher who was really friendly with the students, hanging out with them after school, giving them pizza, giving them a car ride home. And then one of the students got upset and then twisted that to say that the teacher was doing things that the teacher wasn't doing, but perception became reality. And my dad, because my dad is who he is, every time there was a commercial break, he was like, "You see what that teacher was doing? That's, you don't need to do that. You need to make it very clear that you're the adult and they are the child, and you're responsible for them. This is not the type of relationship you need to have with children. You need to worry about how you may be perceived." Now, some people will say, like, why can't we just be ourselves? Why do we have to worry about perceptions? But we are entrusted with the safety, not just only the physical safety, but the mental safety and well-being of young people. So we have to think about those things, because you also don't want that negativity to come to that child when someone's suspecting something that may not even be happening. So with that in mind, one of the things my dad did, the winter break, so my last winter break in college, he took me to the store and he brought me all of these professional clothes. So they were like all these different suits, nice blouses and cardigans and nice slacks. He said, "This is what you need to wear to work." And honestly, today I have about half of those outfits that I still wear now. So that's a testament for the fact that I stayed within some type of weight range. But I always wanted to, even with my dress, to make sure I looked like I was the teacher, to make sure I kept those appropriate boundaries. So with all that backstory, let's get into this. The reality is that social media is a thing, it's popular, it's prevalent, and people use it, especially teachers. And you have teachers that are sharing things that are happening within their classroom. So first, I want to talk a little bit about, you know, posting things on social media and using your classroom as a content space. Number one, you need to read all of the stuff that HR gave you when you got hired. And I know it's really, really annoying to go through all of that stuff, but you really need to go through it, because those are the same policies that will wind up getting you fired because you didn't read it, but you signed it. And you can't go say in the termination hearing, "Well, I didn't know, I didn't understand." They're going to be like, "You're a whole teacher. Your job is to learn and understand." So, no, that's not an excuse. Most districts now have social media policies, and the policies have different parameters. When I was a literacy coach, I was actually behind the social media account for the school I was at. So there were parameters I had to follow, even with the school social media. And so in those forms, some of the language that I have seen, some schools have policies such as you can post students, but not students and their name. If you post students with their name, it should be distributed through the social media channel, and those students should have a form on file. Now with enrollment papers in schools nowadays, there's normally a box that they have parents check to say that you're okay with, you know, your child being photographed, and they'll be on social media. A lot of times when you go to events, you are signing a disclosure to say that they can photograph you and post you. Or if you buy this ticket to this museum, this ticket is agreeing to being photographed and posted on social media. You can do that with adults. general public. But in the school setting, you have to be very aware of that. In schools, you may have kids who are not with their parents, so they may be in foster care, and maybe they're under reunification. That's the process of children getting back with their parents, but they're not back with their parents yet. Or you may have children who are in a situation where it's not in anyone's benefit for them to be on social media and it to be known what school they are going to. So those are some of the reasons like schools have these rules. Some schools have rules about what you can say about them. Some schools have a non-disparagement clause, which says that you can't go on social media to say anything negative about the organization. I am an education writer, as many people know. So I write about my education experience from a student perspective, from a parent perspective, from a teacher perspective, and an administrator perspective. I was administrator during the pandemic. And I will tell you, when I left my administration job, they changed their policy to add a non-disparagement clause because they felt that some of the articles that I had written during the pandemic were disparaging to the organization. Even though they knew that I was a writer, I was really upfront about what I wrote about because all my stuff was online, sent them a link. They were like, we're cool with that. But they were cool. And then when I left, that's when this policy got put into place. But some places have those policies up front. So if you're a teacher, you're going online and you're venting about students, venting about your principal, venting about your fellow colleagues, that could be terms for oral reprimand, written reprimand, progressive discipline, and you not have a job. So that's super important. You also have to remember things like FERPA and HIPAA. FERPA is the Student Protection Act that protects students' data. HIPAA are the laws that protect your health information. I saw stuff during the pandemic where people were posting things about kids and who got COVID. And I'm like, you did not just post a kid's name and the fact that they had COVID on the internet because you're violating HIPAA right now. So those are some of the areas that teachers need to be really cognizant of. And then also, you have to consider your job when you get hired at your school district was to teach, not to turn your classroom into a content area. I've been to many education conferences where I meet people who I've come across originally on social media where their classroom is a zone of content. And when I've tried to have an intellectual conversation with them about teaching and learning and teaching strategies, they don't seem to have much to add to that conversation, but they can tell you about what lighting to have, what angle to have your camera, and what apps they're using to edit their videos to put online. And so now it's not about the teaching and learning, it's about showing off myself. So we go back to the teacher who was, having his hair unbraided. And when he went to explain, he's like, I have a close relationship with these kids. It said he was put on administrative leave. I've saw many comments that say that he's now no longer with his school. I don't know if that is true or not, but I know he got back on social media and he was reading letters from his best friends. He was referring to his students as his best friend. And a lot of the lines there are getting blurred. When you're an authority figure, it's important that it is clear that you are the authority figure, but not in a way that is like, it's my way or the highway, because children are just smaller, younger human beings. They should be treated with humanity, and you can treat kids with humanity without referring to them as your besties and your best friend, without having them in your hair, taking your hair down. Those are things that should not be happening in the teaching and learning space from the school administrator lens. My question is, what does that have to do with teaching and learning? Because there are other ways that we can build relationships with students without crossing those personal boundaries. So when I work with pre-service teachers, I talk about what those boundaries are. One of the things I like to mention is that students do not have my cell phone number. Even my college students don't have my real cell phone number. It was interesting. I gave 2 students my actual cell phone number because they're going to be working in schools that I will be working with as a consultant. And it was the first time it dawned on me when I said that, I didn't give my K-12 students my cell phone number. It never crossed their mind that I also never gave my real number to my college students. What I used is my college students, I used one of those voice voice texting apps where you just, get a number and it essentially comes to your email, it comes to your text, and then you can dial from your computer or your phone through that app. So it was not, and it all comes to my cell phone, but they never have my actual cell phone number. It comes to my email, so I can respond from my email, which I really love when I'm in schools. But when it comes to K-12 space, they didn't even get that. They got my school email, whatever learning management platform we're using, you can message me in there. If you're at home and I'm still at school, you can call my school desk phone. I'll answer that. But there's no other communication lines that should be happening. I don't. I have rules about social media. I don't friend any of my former students on Facebook. I do allow students to connect with me on LinkedIn. They can follow my Twitter account. That's a non-issue for me. Some of them follow my Instagram and some of them follow my TikTok, but I don't friend on Facebook. And the sites where students do follow me at, that's not where I put a lot of my stuff at. So my personal Facebook page, I got a lot of stuff on there. It's really, if you're on my personal Facebook page, it's like 140 people. It's just me sharing a whole bunch of reels, random stuff and random memes. Or memes. My kids always argue with me about the right way to say that. But I don't need you on there. You don't need to have that level of closeness. And for me, I also live in the city where I work. So I run into former students all the time. So you can talk to Mrs. Barnes in the streets, at the grocery store, at the movie theater. Some of the places I've seen my students out and about. You don't need, even as an adult, you don't need my personal cell phone number. And I make that super clear. So we talk about giving out cell phone numbers, how students should respond to you. Then we talk about the fact that any messages that you write to students could come into question. So if what you said to a student, you don't want on the front page of the newspaper, you have no problem reading it aloud to someone, you shouldn't be saying it. The communication should really be about school-based situations. If you're coaching a team, maybe it's about sports. If you're teaching social studies class, maybe it's about social studies class. You're over an awards program, maybe it's about awards. But them messaging you about where you went on Friday night, that doesn't need to be happening because that's not the role that you're playing in their life. I think of teachers as mentors, and mentors is a little bit different than being someone's bestie or their best friend. Also, when it comes to sharing, when we talk about how to actually build relationships with students, I always tell pre-service teachers, you need to be transparent and share a little bit about yourself to make yourself feel like a real person, not this robot that's trying to get through these Shakespeare plays or whatever you're teaching. But I also say there is a limit to what you share. You don't need to overshare. Most of the time, my students know that I'm married. They know that I have identical twins. They know that I grew up in Indianapolis, so I went to school there. They know what college I went to. They may know some of my favorite foods. There's a limit of things that I will talk about. And there's some things that if a student asked me about, I said, I'm not responding to that. And students know really quickly, I will say, I'm not responding to that. That's not up for conversation. And then I don't say anything else. I don't provide an explanation about why it's not up for conversation. Because if you ever try to provide an explanation to a kid when they really want to talk about something they don't need to be talking to you about, then they want to get into a debate with you. And we don't have time to debate because we got all this content, this academics to get through. So that is super important. Also, physical contact with children. I will tell you, when I was an 8th grade English teacher, there was a student who we were giving away awards. That was the awards program at the end of the year, and a kid went up and bear hugged me when she crossed the stage, and you could hear an audible gasp in the audience. And the reason why that happened is because I had a no hugging policy. As a middle school English teacher, as a high school English teacher, no hugging. And I told my students, I said, I will fist bump you, I will high five you, I will give you a little side elbow. I don't hug students. I didn't start hugging students at all until I shifted down to elementary. And that was like a weird situation because those kids, they just jump on you and hug you. And I remember the first time a kid jumped me and hugged me, I literally took my hands out like this and grabbed him by the side. I was like, hey, little person, get back over there. So even with those hugs, when kids want to hug, I do a side hug. We're not doing front to front because that's not necessary. I do a nice little aside hug. And I also make sure it's, out in the public and open, because also a lot of, I also feel that if that teacher was a female, the conversation might not be as being debated as much as if it was a male. But we also need to remember that predators can be in any gender. So you have to pay attention to what female teachers are doing and what male teachers are doing, what any teachers are doing. So I always think about perception can become so much reality. So I always try to make it, because there's ways that you can give kids feedback and make them feel that you love your students without actually having to physically touch them and do things like that. So that is also important as well. If you want to build relationships with students, listening to them is really important. Sometimes you can't solve their problems, but sometimes just being a listening ear, when is a time that you have that. Maybe it's the passing period, a kid wants to talk to you really quick. That's the appropriate time for a kid to come up to you and have a conversation with you. It's not appropriate for them to be calling you late in the middle of the night trying to have a conversation with you. That's not appropriate. Maybe you're coaching a sport and they're talking to you. So I always say your relationship with students should happen in the view of your public school setting. All of these offline conversations, offline situations are things that shouldn't happen. And when I was reading through a lot of the comments about many things, some people were like, oh, we are persecuting a Black man. And the unfortunate or unintended consequence of the DEI social justice movement that happened after the murder of George Floyd is that now, if somebody is of color and they misstep, the race card gets pulled out to say, hey, we're not being culturally responsive, we're not being culturally sensitive, it's braids, you don't understand. And then, there are some people calling other Black people hypocrites because they are questioning the behavior. And I want to say that we'll never be able to have the conversations we need to have if people are automatically assuming that people are saying things because of the race or the gender of the teacher. We really have to sit and take some time to actually delve into what is actually happening and what the perceptions are. So it's super important about how you communicate with students, how you contact them, how you build relationships, where you are building those relationships at. And then remember is that your classroom is not a content zone. The only content that should be happening there is you teaching, not you using your students to get followers, to make reels, and to become an influencer and to make money off of your videos. Because many times when people keep sharing content, their goal is to be get into these programs where they can monetize their videos. And that, to me, is something that we need to be really cognizant of, is that many kids go to their boundary schools. They didn't go to that school. They don't even have a choice about the school they're going to, but they're not going to that school to be a way for you to make a side hustle and get a quick buck. That's not what kids sign up for. And I understand many kids are on social media and many of them enjoy making TikToks. They enjoy making reels. But again, I'm saying that in the classroom space, that is not what we should be doing. And many school district level policies are, because of these situations, they're going in and adding more specific details about what you can and can't do. The other thing you need to be cognizant of, if you read your school district social media policy about what you can and can't do on social media, you have to remember that that doesn't mean that those same rules apply to your personal social media versus the school social media. Your personal social media is a totally different thing. So, for example, my son's had a birthday party and I wanted to share about it. When I shared this one picture of my son's, and it took me some time because, this is not my area of expertise, but I found an app where I could blur out the kids in the background, because I know the kids' parents and some of my son's parents, they have different educational views than I have. And so I don't want them to feel that I'm using their children for content on my page. I just really wanted to share that, hey, I'm a mom of 2 teenage boys now. And so I was cognizant of the perception of that and being mindful of images. Because when we put images of students on the internet, they live there forever. The other part of the conversation that we're not talking about is what grooming truly is and what inappropriate boundaries between adults and children can lead to. It can also lead to children pursuing inappropriate relationships or finding themselves in a relationship that went to something that seemed innocent to something that's not innocent. So I'm going to tell you a little story. Which is why when I saw this video initially, I haven't actually talked about this video at all. So this podcast is my first time talking about it. One of the reasons I waited to talk about it because I'm so tired of everybody knee jerk reacting to everything. Sometimes we just need to wait and sit and think before we speak. So that's part of it. So when I was in high school, there was a teacher at my high school who was known as a perv. There is no nice way to say it. That's what people called this teacher. People talked about how the teacher eyes seemed to be wandering across people's bodies, how if girls were bending over, that it appeared that the teacher was looking down girls' shirts, and that this teacher was saying inappropriate things. Fast forward years later, I see on the news that this teacher from my high school, now I didn't have this teacher. My husband and I went to the same high school. My husband had this teacher. See on the news that the teacher gets fired. The teacher gets fired for inappropriate interaction with a female student. So the teacher gets terminated, and then they revoke the teacher's teaching license. Then the teaching license went down to like a suspension, so eventually it got reinstated. When this teacher's license got reinstated, so worked in one school district, I went to school in Lawrence Township. The teacher goes and gets hired in Indianapolis Public Schools. Now, the reporters that followed the case of this teacher, getting in this situation at this one school, reached out to Indianapolis Public Schools to say, hey, why is this teacher working at your school? When that was brought to Indianapolis Public Schools' attention, essentially they released a statement saying something to the effect of the person didn't disclose why the employment at the previous job was, and so they weren't honest on the application, and they used that to immediately terminate the teacher. A few years after that, I'm working at a school with that teacher from my high school. You can't make this up. So of course I tell my husband, I tell everybody, I'm like, that teacher works at this school. And sure enough, that teacher gets fired from the school that I was working with for similar situation that goes back to what happened at my high school. And so a lot of times when people are saying, hey, we need to really be careful about boundaries between students and staff, this is why people are saying this, because there are people who see kids and schools as their playground to enact harm, or it's a place where they don't have self-control and know how to implement appropriate boundaries, and where they go out and do things they don't have any business doing, or they're blurring the lines between an adult as a guy on the side and an adult who's your best pal and your buddy. I told students all the time, y'all not my friends. My friends are A, grown, and B, a friendship is reciprocal. You as a child, as a student, you cannot reciprocate a friendship with me in a way that would be needed for me as an adult. So therefore, we are not friends. I will be friendly to you. I will treat you with all the humanity and respect because you are a fellow human being. But my job is to teach you information, prepare you for the workforce, prepare you for going off to college or to the military, prepare you to be a citizen in your local community, prepare you for the global community. My job is not to make you feel like you are my best friend. And so the bigger issue of it is a lack of how the lines have been blurred and a lack of being willing to accept feedback. Sometimes I have to have conversations with teachers who are maybe your student teaching, who are, when you're a pre-service teacher, you field experience, or just people who are actually teaching. When I have to have these conversations to say, hey, what you're doing here, that's not appropriate. You are the teacher. You shouldn't be doing this. You shouldn't be buying all of these kids, all of this is expensive stuff. You shouldn't be letting these inappropriate behaviors in your classroom slide because you want to be everybody's pal. Like, you are the adult. You're the person that's supposed to be steering the ship. and y'all just having a party on the ship. You're not steering, you're not leading. And so when I think about teacher and student relationships, I think it's harder to build relationships in the age of social media, because social media can go two ways. You can also have kids sitting in your classroom with their cell phone, with their device, video taping you, videotaping themselves, making all type of content. They could be making content talking about you online, and so it goes both ways. So when it comes to social media, I tell people, think before you post. Think about the unintended consequences. Think about how somebody could be harmed, what perceptions could be, how that could impact your employment. You need to think to yourself, is this post worth me losing my job? If the answer is no, don't post it. If you think there's an inkling that it could violate a policy or it could be misconstrued, don't post it. Don't do it. It's not necessary. There's so many things that you can post on social media. Maybe there's an awards program, you want to post about that, or there's a band concert, you want to post about that, or kids, they just finished these presentations, you may want to post pictures of the posters that they have created. There are things that you can share online to say that you're proud to be a teacher, you love your students, without using your students as a product for you to disperse across the internet, and for that video to live out there in the internet forever. And then when I talk about personal space, there is no reason that anybody should be in anyone's hair at work. Colleague to colleague, kid to adult, it's just unnecessary. As a grown person, if you know you have an appointment at X amount of time, it's your responsibility to have your hair in the state it needs to be in before you go to that appointment. It is not any child's responsibility to make sure you're together, because that you shouldn't be putting it on children, because that's not your job. And yes, maybe the kids enjoyed it. The teacher said something online that little girls they enjoy doing these things, and I'm the teacher or a relative of the teacher, and I'm just like, even if little girls enjoy doing these things, that's not what they went to school for. You are not a cosmetology teacher. This is not a beauty class. This is not what's happening. That's not what you are the teacher of. So if you're listening to this as a school administrator, it would be a great opportunity. I know the school year is about to wrap up, just to go back over social media policies, what they look like, what they mean for your school. If you're a teacher, it's time to evaluate what you're posting on social media. I would take the time to comb back through your social media. Do you have some stuff on there that you shouldn't be posting? I know on Facebook, you can click the Facebook memories every single day. I click them, and sometimes I'm like, oh, that was so stupid. It may not even be something about students. I'm like, delete. Go back through and delete those things. Think about, could any harm be caused? If you are a student, I want you to hear me and be clear. I want you to like your teachers. I want you to enjoy your classes, but your teachers are not there to be your friend. And you're going to have a really strong relationship with a teacher. A teacher can inspire you. A teacher can guide you on the path without crossing that boundary where they are jeopardizing their employment or jeopardizing their ability to get employed somewhere else. And so these are all things that we need to talk about. So I hope, and if you're a college professor watching this, you're working with pre-service teachers, I really hope you'll find a way to incorporate this into class. I would even go as far to put out a scenario, what happened, and talk to the students about what they think about it and give some viewpoints about it, because we need to have these conversations, because if we don't have these conversations with pre-service teachers, we're going to have more teachers coming out who are young, who may find themselves in these situations. And all of these situations are 100% avoidable. So social media is not bad. It's a great tool. It's a great way to connect. I have reconnected with many of my students because they have found me on LinkedIn. I see what jobs they had now. I'm like, look at you doing your job, and look at all the progress you're making. That's great. That's appropriate, but we also just need to be cognizant of the fact that you can make relationships with students without making them your personal content. So stay tuned. Next week, we'll be back with episode 74, and I'm interviewing someone from Michigan, the University of Michigan, who's going to tell us a little bit about this counseling program that's been that happens at this university that comes alongside high schools to help fill the gaps with school counseling. So tune in next week for that interview, and that will be next Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.